the inside story on the issues that affect you and your community. This is Local 12 Newsmakers.
Good morning and welcome to Local 12 Newsmakers. I'm Dan Hurley. Redistricting after the 2010 census has rendered all 4 local congressional districts overwhelmingly Republican. Wanting to highlight one congressional district this cycle, I am focusing on the Ohio 1st Congressional District. The 1st District includes western and northern Hamilton County and all of Warren County. Approximately 730,000 people live in the district, with 76% of those theoretically old enough to vote. A little over 71% are white, with 22% African American, 94% are American born, with only about 0.3% Hispanic. At best, this is a district that is an uphill climb for a Democrat, but in 2008, a Democrat did win, although not this district. I am joined now by Steve Chabot, the incumbent congressman from Ohio, 1st District. Mr. Chabot served as in Congress for a total of 16 years, from 1995 to 2009, and again from 2011 to the present. Prior to serving in Congress, he served on Cincinnati City Council and the Hamilton County Board of Commissioners. Michelle Young is an attorney who originally came to Cincinnati to interview for a position as a law clerk with a judge in the U.S. Circuit Court. This is her first time to run for public office herself, but she has been involved as a campaign director for Dr. Lakshmi Sammarco for Hamilton County Coroner 4 years ago. Welcome to Newsmakers for both of you.
Thank you, Dan.
Let's begin. Send this first to you, Michelle. No matter what happens on the presidential level this year, whoever's elected, as a nation, we've really got to address what obviously is the deep sense of anger and disaffection that millions of people have. And a lot of that's rooted in economic dislocation because of the knowledge economy, people not having the right skills, et cetera, et cetera. So from a congressional point of view, if you were in Congress, what do you think we should be doing to address the issues that are of concern to people that feel disconnected from the American dream?
It's one of the reasons I ran, to bring people back to the American dream. First, we have to have an economy that recognizes all the changes internationally. And that means we have to work with the tax structure to allow us to compete locally and abroad. Right now, many of our businesses are not able to compete because of taxes, because of laws that we have passed that have allowed for companies to compete with third world sweatshops against our workers. So first, we have to bring the jobs back. We have to think about that. Second, we have to retool for the 21st century economy completely, from top to bottom. Third, we have to bring back democracy. Right now, you're right, I'm in a gerrymandered district. We have to make every person feel they're part of this democracy and that we're listening to them. That means the poor, the underprivileged, people who are disabled, women, families.
Steve, what would you say to that?
Well, it's an honor to represent the people of this district, and I think it's the best district in the country, Dan, quite frankly. But we have problems too. Unemployment is higher than it ought to be. And you know, right now, we just had some numbers come out showing that the unemployment ticked up from 4.9 to 5%. I really think it's worse than that, because a lot of people that prior to this recession that we've gone through, prior to that, you know, we've basically had people that were working full-time. Oftentimes they're now working part-time or a couple of jobs. We've got people that are underemployed. They maybe have a college degree and they have a hard time finding a job that they think is paying what they ought to be paid. And a lot of people have dropped out of the workforce altogether, and so they're not even counted in those unemployment numbers. So
which may be why it ticked up, because more people are coming back in.
That may be the case, but I think it's actually a tougher economy out there than the government thinks it is. So we need to get this economy moving again. That means that we need to simplify the tax code, for example. It's far too complicated. I happen to be the chairman of the House Small Business Committee now, and small businesses create 70% of the jobs in this economy nowadays. But they're struggling because the government overregulates them, it overtaxes them. Access to capital is tough. If you're going to start a small business or expand a business that you have to grow and create more jobs, you need money. And because of a legislation legislation that was passed called Dodd-Frank, there's a whole new level of bureaucracy that's looking over the shoulders of community banks and credit unions, so they have a hard time getting money. So we need to grow this economy and create more jobs.
Can I say one thing, Steve? But for 22 years, there've been what I see is an increasing failure to see what's really happening, which is abroad, we have tax havens, we're not collecting taxes, we have companies that are able to compete against us without really paying taxes, without having union wages, sweatshops, and locally, we have not been protecting our workers.
Let me, one piece of this, and deals with the question of the status of workers. Steve, you over the years, and the Republican Party over the years, have been supporter of free trade agreements, NAFTA, CAFTA, the newly proposed Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is hasn't been voted on yet, hasn't been completed. Where do you stand on these kinds of agreements at this point?
Well, in general, I think free trade is good if the United States can compete with other nations around the world, and our businesses generally can and do, and that creates more jobs in our country. The problem is the Obama administration, I would say to some extent the Bush administration prior to that, has not enforced the trade deals. We've allowed these overseas companies to get their products into our country, but we have allowed those countries to oftentimes keep our products out. So we need to enforce the trade agreements that we have. You mentioned TPP, or the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We're looking very closely at that now. The administration has recommended it, but if you look at the presidential election candidates, we had Bernie Sanders originally, who was very strongly opposed to it, and so Hillary, who once called it the gold standard, has now come out against TPP, and so has Donald Trump.
Yeah,
both sides are against it. So it's something that we need to look closely at before we just
And your party now says it wants to roll back NAFTA too. And
there are those talking about it. She's had a number of these, and I want to be very civil here today, but on her website, she accused me of voting for NAFTA.
Well, no,
interestingly enough, I wasn't even in Congress yet when NAFTA was passed. It is something that we ought to look at, but Canada and Mexico and the United States, they've benefited, but they've also been hurt. So we need to look at all these trade deals and make sure that they're working for the American people.
Absolutely.
Sure. Well, you've been voting for free trade, and you've been voting for shipping out our jobs, and also for tax loopholes, which also allow these major corporations which have shipped out our jobs to not pay their fair share of taxes. Now, I think we can take a realistic look at a great global economy, protect our workers, bring back our tax base, and succeed. And I believe, if I'm right, you are for the TPP, even including provisions which would drive up the prices of pharmaceuticals too.
Well, you made a number of accusations, so let me talk about just a couple of them. Relative to, for example, taxes, what I think we need to do is make sure that the tax code that we have now is fair not only to individuals but also to businesses, especially small businesses, because those are the job creators. So that's what we need to do. Relative to trade deals, when you look at TPP or you look at NAFTA or CAFTA, which was a Central American Free Trade Agreement, or the African Free Trade Agreement, they have oftentimes worked to our advantage, but it has worked to the disadvantage of a number of people. We need to pass smarter trade deals, and once we do it, we have to make sure that the administration, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, enforces those trade deals in the best interest of the American people.
What about the specific question of companies that hold their earnings overseas, not bringing them back so they don't have to pay local taxes? Now, in theory, that could be, both sides have talked about negotiating, and it's sort of, at what level are we going to tax?
We think it's probably $2 trillion at least that could come back into the United States.
$2.3 trillion.
But we have to make sure, that's why I say at least. So what we need to make sure that we do is encourage those businesses to bring them back here. The reason that they take the businesses out of the country is because Americans...
What level would you favor
let me just say this, Dan. The taxes that we have right now are unfair to both individuals and to businesses right now. So we have to make our tax code smarter here and lower than it is over in other countries. That's why Ireland, for example, was a tax haven for people. A lot of American businesses went over there. We have to make sure that the businesses come here and that there are jobs for folks.
What level would you, if to entice corporations to bring their earnings back here, at what level would you want to tax them?
There are various numbers I've seen. 25% is one I've seen, all the way down to 15%.
Right.
But somewhere that's a lot more competitive than
Okay.
33 to even over 40%
Right.
what they're paying right now.
Michelle?
Well, there's no doubt there need to be changes. But for 22 years, he's been part of the Congress.
but
no,
what-
the Congress has watched the entire transfer of our wealth
But what
abroad.
level would you want to see that? What, to have companies bring their earnings back so that they can be taxed?
Well, it's two levels. We have to help small businesses, and the truth of the matter is I pay 35% as an entrepreneur in my small business, tax rate, and I pay, but a big corporation, the Fortune 500, or most big corporations don't pay because of tax loopholes. We have to first close the tax loopholes. Then we have to come up with a fair rate that allows small businesses and big businesses to stay and
This
prosper.
question and many others really relates to how can you get some sort of level of cooperation across the aisle, because this has been, that's why I was driving at what rate you were interested in, because this has been on the table, just haven't been able to get to an answer. In the latest evaluation of 6 leading polls, Congress has a 76% disapproval rating. Mostly because people just feel like there's a lot of squabbling and people are dug in, never can get anything done. So what do we do to change that? Michelle,
Well,
let you start that one.
We need change. If we come in, we need a
Yeah, but
whole
what's
new
that
culture.
mean?
That means I'm going to knock on 434 doors. That means I'm going to look for points of cooperation everywhere we can. It means when we talk about this, I didn't give a number. Do you know why? Because we have to work out that number together. And we have to go beyond partisanship to patriotism, beyond party politics to what's best for our nation. Steve, look at the problems from childhood poverty to the loss of wealth, to the heroin problem, all, to even the Brent Spence Bridge, all under the watch of, for 22 years
okay.
of Congress.
Could I respond, Dan?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, when she says she's going to knock on 434 doors, she's talking about the 435 members of Congress, assuming she'd be one. Those are the other folks in
Yeah, I
Congress.
will.
And if you were running against somebody else, that might be an appropriate criticism. But most people, if you talk to the Democrats in Congress, they'll tell you that I always do work with Democrats. As I mentioned, I'm the chairman of the House Small Business Committee. The Democratic ranking member on there, Nydia Velasquez from New York, we have a very good working relationship. We're working on the MSD issue to try to keep our sewer rates down here. We're working with Todd Portune on that. And my principal sponsor on the legislation to hopefully fix this is Marcia Fudge, who's a Democrat from Cleveland. She's very liberal on most issues. I'm pretty darn conservative, as most people know, on most issues. But you do need to work together. So your criticism about, oh, well, you're going to knock on doors, that might work with somebody else, but this member of Congress already does that.
You vote 97% with the Republicans. You have been on the wrong side of so many issues having to do with social justice, with helping out the poor, with lifting up women, with helping out people. You have
That's
not been.
That is just wrong.
But
that's just wrong.
That's
and if you did have the opportunity to be in Congress, my guess is Nancy Pelosi would have you voting 99% with the Democrats.
Okay.
A lot of those votes are procedural and don't really matter. The big ones, I always work bipartisan because that's the way you can get things done.
Okay, one final thing, and it was hinted at here before. Michelle brought it up in passing. Brent Spence Bridge. Is there any way that Congress, that you can see any way Congress is going to break this deadlock so that there is more federal investment in a new Brent Spence Bridge, or are we just stuck for the foreseeable future?
It can
twiddling our
be
thumbs?
a portion of it from the federal. Another inaccuracy, she said we haven't done anything on the Brent Spence Bridge. We've got nearly $60 million on the Brent Spence Bridge. That isn't going to build it. And we worked in a bipartisan manner with Ken Lucas, a Democrat across the river, and Sherrod Brown and many other Democrats. But it's going to cost a lot more than that. In the most recent transportation bill that we got passed, we worked in a bipartisan manner and got a new funding pot in there for projects of regional and national significance, and a significant portion of the Brent Spence Bridge could be paid for out of that. But in order to get that money, the local folks, the state of Ohio, the state of Kentucky, the city of Cincinnati, they all have to work together and come up with a funding mechanism at the local level.
Do you
That's
think
what we need to do.
even with what you think might happen, will tolls still be necessary?
That's unknown at this time. That's
Okay.
one of the things the local folks will have to decide.
Michelle.
2.2 trillion, 22 years, studies. Steve, to get things done, we have to see them done. I know you're trying, but it's not working. Give me a chance. I will get the job done because I am innovative, I'm creative, I don't take no for an answer. I have a big heart, I try really hard. We need fresh ideas. We need new blood. Weren't you once for term limits?
There's good.
Were you for term limits once, Steve?
I still am for term limits.
But
and
12
I voted
years,
for them.
but you promised
Every
it.
opportunity that we've had to vote for term limits, I voted for them. The problem is it takes a constitutional amendment that takes
But did you
two-thirds in the
agree-
House and two-thirds in the Senate.
Okay.
And no, I didn't agree to self-term it myself, although some people like yourself have made that inaccurate attack, and it's
1994.
just not true.
Okay,
That's
all
when
right.
I got elected. That's
Okay.
right. And the people get to elect us every 2 years.
Thank you very much for being here this morning. To find out more about both of these candidates, check out their websites at michelleyoung.org and steveshabot.com. Stay tuned. After the break, Hamilton County Sheriff's Race.
Hey, listen.
Welcome back. For the last 7 weeks, I've attempted to arrange a joint interview with the candidates for Hamilton County Sheriff. Despite my best efforts, Sheriff Jim Neal, the Democratic incumbent, has rejected repeated offers to appear on the show alongside his opponent. Newsmakers rest on the premise that viewers, voters, deserve to watch candidates talk face-to-face about important issues. 4 years ago, when candidate Neal was an underdog in his race against Sean Donovan, he was happy for the opportunity to debate his opponent on Newsmakers. I am joined this morning by Gary Lee, the Republican candidate for Hamilton County Sheriff. Mr. Lee retired from the Cincinnati Police Department a few years ago after 33 years. Over that time, he served as the commander of District 1, the Central Business District over the Rhine, West End. He also served as the commander of the Special Services Section, the Inspection Section, and as the first commander of the Information Fusion Section, which develops the potential for real-time crime analysis and information sharing. Mr. Lee earned his master's in counseling and is now works as a trauma therapist and addictions counselor. Welcome to Newsmakers.
Thank you, Dan. It's great to be here.
What would you want to do if you were elected on November the 8th in the area of the way that policing services are delivered by the Sheriff's Department? Because the Sheriff's Department has a couple of different areas. One, it takes care of the Justice Center, the jail. But you're also providing a lot of services out in communities around the county. How would you want to change what's going on now?
Well, I think there's two critical elements that really need to be upgraded and moved forward as a department. The first is obviously the heroin epidemic, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The second is really developing more of a community-oriented policing philosophy. And this is a philosophy that I became fully accustomed to during the 10 years of the collaborative agreement that Cincinnati Police Department went through. And I really believe that the collaborative agreement helped to make Cincinnati's police department a better department, helped to make Cincinnati a better community. And one of the cornerstones of that success was the community-oriented policing philosophies. And that basically says that we do not police the communities, that more so we are partners with the communities in solving the problems that lead to the crime and disorder that we want to have changed. So thinking more in terms of partnership with our stakeholders, including communities, and working in collaboration with other stakeholders, which is especially important with the heroin epidemic.
Let's talk about the heroin epidemic. I mean, there's no easy answers here.
No.
What do you think needs to be done that is not being done now?
I think especially the Hamilton County Heroin Coalition is well on its way to establishing some protocols that will really address some of these issues in the long term. One of the advantages that I have as a candidate is I have 33 years of law enforcement experience, and I'm also trained in counseling, especially in addictions treatment and recovery. So I'm the only candidate maybe in the Midwest that can bring those two disciplines together. And it's when we combine the efforts of all of the stakeholders is when we'll really start moving forward at a faster pace. So for example, The Sheriff's Department has to take the lead in helping to collaborate and mobilize with the mental health community, the medical community, the faith community, social service agencies, the criminal justice system. Each of those stakeholders has particular assets and expertise that they bring to the table.
You said to the Enquirer board that you were going to continue your counseling practice, your independent counseling practice, and they were critical of that. You were just saying, you were talking here about bringing your skills and experience into the department. Are you going to maintain, what's your thought at this point about maintaining an independent practice beyond this job?
What we were talking about there is me bringing my counseling expertise into the realm of public service. I didn't intend that to imply that I was going to continue to work part-time as a counselor. What I was speaking to there was my ability to blend the counseling disciplines in with the police leadership.
So you would
practice.
not continue another job?
No.
Okay. What about the proposal that Sheriff Neal has made about creating a detox and counseling center inside of the Justice Center?
I think that on the surface, it sounds like a good idea, but the problem that you have with addictions is it requires long-term care and support, more so than what you're going to get in the 3 months or even 6 months within the Justice Center. And we have discovered quite a few records where inmates are being released from the Justice Center and immediately going back into the addiction cycle. So more so what has to happen, in my opinion, is there has to be an aftercare network set up so that when the inmates are released from the Justice Center, they can step into that support system. They'll get detoxed in the Justice Center by just the very nature of the confinement. So once they reach a level of sobriety, then the point is, where do we create an aftercare system that when they leave, they can get the support they need to maintain their sobriety?
And would that aftercare system be the responsibility of the Sheriff's Department or some?
No, that's where the partnership comes in, where we're working with the mental health and social services, the faith community, all of which independently have resources.
Sheriff Neal has been suggested that you don't have the experience to put together the budget of a large department like this, and that we just talked a little bit about a budget question implication. What do you say to that? This is the largest budget in the county, $62 million. What do you say about that?
Well, I have more experience coming into this office than he did, first of all, because as a captain in the Cincinnati Police Department, we're considered part of the upper command staff. And therefore, I often worked with administrative responsibilities, budget responsibilities within the department. I feel that with the specialized training that I've gotten at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia, and the Senior Management Institute of Policing in Boston, Massachusetts, that I have a very sound background in budget management. And he may think he has experience in that, but the reality is, for the last 4 years, he's been up to $5 million over budget each of those years. And that has to stop, because that's impacting other departments in the county.
On the other hand, though, he says he's cut that budget from $87 million to $62 over those 4 years, so that he's made a lot of work. We got only about 30 seconds. What do you say to that?
Okay. Well, the $87 million budget cut was actually what took place in 2008 when the whole county went through drastic cuts, and that was under Simon Leese's administration. The bottom line is a good leader has to set priorities, have a clear vision, and match his resources and assets to that
Okay, let me make sure people know how to find out more information. To learn more about the candidates for the sheriff's office, check out their websites at leeforsheriff.org or keepjimnealsheriff.com. Thank you for being with us this morning.
My pleasure.
And thank you for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. Next week, issue 44, the proposed new levy for the Cincinnati Public Schools. Given its inclusion of $15 million for early childhood education, it's not just a money issue, it raises policy questions. Have a good week.